Holy cow, Multiverse of American Dadness freaking killed it. I mean, they nailed it. It was such a cool episode, packed with way more Easter eggs, references, and even direct messages to the superfans than I was expecting there to be. So if you haven't seen the most recent episode of American Dad, Season 18, Episode 14, Multiverse of Madness, Multiverse of American Dadness, you should go watch it first, but I'm going to break down all the missable details along with the base story, so spoiler warning, and let's get into it. We open in an alternate reality, where the main differences we can observe are that Haley and Steve get along and hang out.
The only thing better than seeing Shaggy with my best friends is seeing him with my little brother!
Lewis is a senator, and they don't have movies in this universe. And for anybody wondering, no, there are no differences between this universe's living room and ours. I checked. The family are watching the news coverage of an upcoming concert for real-life musician Shaggy, which Haley is excited for. And then Stan and Francine surprise Haley and Steve with tickets to go together. The two are actually thrilled to go together when suddenly Steve's head is blown off, and evil Steve steps into frame laughing maniacally and explains he's jumping around universes, killing Steve's in order to grow his power. We've got some details in evil Steve's outfit here. Obviously we have the gauntlet thing that all the multiverse traveling characters have to wear, and he's actually wearing a version of the belt that Cyborg Lewis gives Haley later in the episode that helps track down Steve's. Aside from that though, it's just a utilitarian outfit, though definitely designed in Steve's likeness, with the yellow undershirt, the red outer piece, plus the blue jeans, and those still count as glasses. Overall though, just a really cool adapted character design. Evil Steve then proceeds to show the family a list of the Steves he's killed so far, which consist of Grumpy Steve, Sleepy Steve, Lady Steve, Amish Steve, Little Girl Steve, Slutty Steve, Nanny Steve, Old Man Steve, who does look like Steve did in the episode where he jumps around ages, and next we have Part Beaver Steve, and lastly, generic Steve number 112. He then teleports away to another universe using the wrist device, which we later learn transports people using a black hole created inside their buttholes. A butt black hole, if you will. There's also a couple details hidden in the teleportation sequence here. For starters, if you pay attention, the sound ends differently when you are in the universe being teleported away from. There's a distinct sound at the very end, almost like a really old TV turning off. As opposed to when characters are arriving in a universe, there's no end sound. But anyways, the theme song starts and breaks into a multiverse of theme songs. And if you weren't getting mild Rick and Morty vibes between evil Steve and evil Rick and Morty, the visual bit they do here during the theme song should at least feel reminiscent of Season 2 Episode 1 of Rick and Morty, when they break time and their reality splits into multiple potential realities. I don't think they're in any way ripping them off though. This is its own story and its own thing. I'm just saying that these feel like intentional details, probably put in as an homage. But after the theme song, the family, which remember is not our original family, is grieving Steve when a cyborg Lewis called Vengeance Lewis teleports in from another universe. The cyborg thing feels like a definite nod to when Stan comes back from the future as a cyborg, but more directly, they establish that Cyborg Lewis is basically supposed to be Cable from Deadpool.
Used to be all I needed to unwind was to see my wife and kids. The Steve in my original universe was our nanny, and the evil Steve blew up my house just to kill him. I wish I'd died, but cyborg technology gave me another chance. A chance at revenge.
You came into my home and took the only thing that made it a home. Sound familiar?
He apologizes to the family for their dead Steve, but says it's not his job to explain because it's somebody else's. He teleports away and Exposition Lewis teleports in, passing out pamphlets titled, "So Your Steve's Been Killed." In the pamphlet, they hit a lot of stuff. We've got Old Man Steve from the age jumping episode here, Cool Steve and Snot from the Lola Fuentes episode, as well as Jim Bro Steve from that episode, and a fourth Steve who seems extremely familiar, but no matter how much I Google and no matter how much I search my brain, I can't put my finger on it or find anything about it. So if you know anything, put it in the comments. The pamphlet is really funny and confusing though. It's produced by the Exposition Lewis project with the colon placed in the wrong place, which I think is intentional and is meant to go with the vibe that this is a small-time organization and that this Lewis probably made the pamphlet himself. The logo says Exposition Lewis's expository pamphlets, with a great picture of him with that face full of British upper-class disdain. And it has a few sections which are all extremely interesting, so we're going to go through them. The first is called The Good and the Bad, and it reads, "Your Steve has been killed. That much is fact. Good news is there are many Steves alive. One Steve is a friendly angel with a flat body and miniature legs. Steve walked over to the window and reflected on his crowded surroundings. He had some knowledge of the multiverse and its confusing, glorious space-time. It was a place that encouraged a tendency to feel afraid." It's very confusing because it opens with 3 related sentences and then shifts to like a story about a Steve. Still entertaining though. Next section is called Is My Steve Alive in Another Timeline? And it answers its titular question like this. Your Steve is unalive. He saw something coming in the distance. The figure of a Steve. He glanced at his own reflection. He was an incredible, modest milk drinker, but not even an incredible Steve, who once helped a gigantic Steve cross a time warp. As you can see, there's a misplaced period here and an uncapitalized first word there, just again driving home the point that this is a small operation, and overall it just doesn't make a ton of sense. But that's true for a lot of Lewis's dialogue, and I love this pamphlet, so it's all good. The next page is even weirder though. The top has no title, but seems like reviews that you would see online. Haley says, "I feel like I know Steve. In a way, it feels as though I've always known him." Stan says, "Steve's as fragile as any that has been." And somebody whose name we can't see because it's covered by this coupon says something starting with, "Saying the clouds danced like sleeping rats." Then it cuts off, but somewhere in there also says, "That makes." There's then a title of some sort that ends in an S, and a story, I think. One that we can't see the beginning of, but does continue. "We managed with our fingers. As Steves step out and all Steves became closer, he could see the easy glint in her eye. Steve gazed with affection in 6188 for miniature Steves. She said in hushed tones, 'I love you and I want closure.' Steve looked back, even more concerned for Steve, quantum entanglement. Moments later, Steve was dead. Steve made himself a nice drink of milk." The end. All the milk comments are obviously referencing his breast milk addiction thanks to Francine.
I need breast milk! Ring-a-ding-ding.
And there's a chance that this pamphlet's body of text was written by an AI, but I'm okay with that. And finally, there's a McLewis Burger coupon for 15% off, a store we do get to see later on. Lewis tells everyone there's only a handful of McLewis burgers in the whole multiverse, and then explains that Evil Steve goes from universe to universe, killing Steves in order to grow his power. A very classic multiverse story trope, but that's okay. Haley interrupts and angrily asks if Lewis knew about Evil Steve, why he wasn't doing something about it to stop him. To which Lewis responds that his job is explaining things, not doing things, and says all they can do now is hope that the next Steve
is tough as nails.
We then cut to our regular universe, as the message on the screen says, but the writers also included a longer message for anybody who pauses, and it's hilarious. It goes, "Our regular universe, that our viewers are intimately familiar with and have seen for hundreds of episodes, not including some of the Christmas specials and probably several others, and yes, for sure several others. TV Universe Stan, Hot Tub Stan, Cyborg Stan, so many more." Anyways, it continues, "Also, if you're reading this, it means you paused. You nerd. Why don't you go find someone to have sex with?" Other than the fact that I personally am married, I think it's safe to say that we've all been dadded. We see Steve working on schematics of the Shark's Nest, the stadium for the Zuka Sharks. And since this is a comedy show and the last line before the scene change was,
"All we can do now is hope whichever Evil Steve goes after next is tough as nails."
Steve immediately hurts his hands drawing.
Ah! My little boy fingers again!
Then we see Evil Steve teleport onto a rooftop nearby before shifting downstairs to watch a version of the events we saw in the other universe at the start of the episode. The family minus Steve are watching news coverage of the Shaggy concert, and Stan and Francine surprise Haley with tickets, but say it's for her to take Steve. Unlike the first Haley, who was excited though, this Haley dreads taking Steve. Stan and Francine try to convince her to take him by mentioning their siblings that we rarely see, and Francine goes a little meta.
Stan's brother is barely even canon.
It's true.
But no matter what they say, Haley doesn't want to take Steve. He suddenly rushes down the stairs though, and says he had been working on schematics of the shark's nest they could use at the concert. Our Haley seems annoyed by this though, and calls him a dork. He runs off crying, saying that he just wants his sister to love him, and Stan says she can only have the tickets if she takes Steve, so she chases after him. Before she can catch up though, Evil Steve finds him, and just before he kills him, our Lewis accidentally runs him over and delivers my favorite joke of the episode.
Oh God, a dead white boy! They'll give me the chair for this!
Suddenly, Vengeance Lewis shows up too and gets mad that someone else killed Evil Steve. And Exposition Lewis shows up to explain the alternate Steves and Lewises in the multiverse. Steve gets excited after learning all this, takes Evil Steve's teleporting watch thing, and decides to go out searching for a universe where Haley wants to spend time with him. Haley eventually catches up though, and Exposition Lewis tells her where Steve went, and Vengeance Lewis says he'll hang out with our universe's Lewis and gives her his teleporting watch and Steve tracker belt, explaining that it can't take her straight to him, but if she keeps jumping, eventually she will catch up. The first universe she jumps to is the Oops All Berries universe, which we only get a glimpse of, but I love. You've got a Abercrombie and Fitch, a Bath and Berry Works, K-Berry Toys, Pinkberry, which is the same, just spelled differently, Barry's Pizza Kitchen, and Build-A-Berry. But my favorite detail by far is the Mermaid Berry water fountain. Anyways, Haley realizes Steve isn't here and moves on to the next universe, which is a universe with a black Steve. The next one seems normal at first, but has a hilarious twist.
Flag, 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 flag!
And the one after that is one where people seem to be bulls.
I'm a bull!
Nope.
Bull, 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 bull!
This part also feels Rick and Morty-esque, and I don't mind it at all. I think they play it really well and don't overdo it the way that Rick and Morty tends to sometimes.
Dimension. Dimensions. Dimensional. Dimension. It's Dimension 35C.
And next she gets to one of the 5 universes with a McLewis burger in it, and it is clearly a direct homage to Kenan and Kel. Also a continuation of the joke that Lewis is the inspiration for a lot of TV shows starring young African Americans from the 80s and 90s. The next universe has another Black Steve, and Exposition Lewis pops back in holding a script for The Royal Tenenbaums, a Wes Anderson joint, a real film from 2001 written by Wes Anderson and Owen Wilson, featuring a ton of famous people. They don't really provide an explanation for this, but if you have any clues, put them in the comments, because I am clueless. We cut back to our Lewis and Vengeance Lewis talking in the car about getting revenge for our Lewis. They're waiting out front of Billy's house to beat him up when Vengeance Lewis convinces our Lewis they should go after the guy who his wife cheated with. They take off yelling threats at Billy, and I love this little detail of Billy pulling his stitched together neck skin back to show he's nervous, like it was a turtleneck or something. It's just a gory take on a classic gag. We next see Steve in another universe, one where houses are built into the rocks and books grow like flowers. It's also got a Stalagmite Comics and Games, an Otherworlds Colonies office, a schematic fanatic shop, some kind of alien on a sign that says call today, and an arcade called the Arcave. And finally, it even has a pizza overlord.
33,000 emails, where did they all go? Hillary makes me sick, a time to lock her up for sure. We are all the puppets and George Soros pulls the strings. Pizza overlord, the thing. Klaus wrote the lyrics.
Our Steve leaves the house followed by a pregnant woman version of Snot wearing a "This universe is Miss Universe" sash. The two are saying goodbye, and we learn in this universe you get pregnant through prolonged eye contact, and that Steve had gotten Snot pregnant. Haley shows up and tells Steve he's coming back with her so she can go to the concert, but he says no and that he's gonna find a version of her that wants to hang out with him, and then he teleports away. Snot tells Haley Steve just wants her to love him, and she finally feels bad that Steve feels uncared for by her. Suddenly the universe glitches and Exposition Lewis shows up and says,
Haley, these glitches mean we're running out of time. You and Steve have to get back to your universe. If you two don't make it to that Shaggy concert, the entire multiverse will implode.
So she teleports after Steve again and finds a universe where time works differently, and Steve had helped build a better world. She sees a taxi driver, Human Klaus, driving a Haley to the Shaggy concert and asks about the Steve from the statue, her Steve, and they say that he had already left, and this Haley says that she hated him, but our Haley finally defends him. This Haley then reveals her version of Steve, which is a lot like Chip from Family Guy's Vestigial Peter episode.
Tumor.
Our Haley teleports after our Steve again, but this time to the universe from the start of the episode, and we get another personal and more secret message from the writers saying, "Get a life, nerd," but it only stays up for a few frames this time. We see this universe's Francine eating a scoop of Steve's ashes. And then while this Haley is grieving over Steve, our Haley teleports in and asks her about Steve. This Haley says she hadn't seen our Steve and explains what happened to hers. And finally she gets jealous when our Haley says that she had been unappreciative of her Steve. So when our Haley teleports away, this Haley tackles her to go along with her. They teleport into the universe where satire works, aka the old version, running in the 16:9 formatting and the older animation from the early seasons, and we get two amazing lines that sum up seasons 1 to 5.
Well, I'm off to hold a mirror up to society.
Pecan Sandies.
Then we visit the Effective Communication universe, which I think is a reference to seasons like 7 to 10, after which there was a huge shakeup in the writing staff and even the producers. Finally, they find Steve in a universe where Haley is the younger sibling, and her Steve is dead. The young Haley is happy to have her Steve back, but the other two Haleys barge in, both trying to convince him to go back to their universe with them. Steve says no, but Haley finally expresses that she does want to spend time with him and misses him, and he finally decides to go home with her. Then out of nowhere, a god-level trinity of Jeffs riding some kind of giant steampunk-looking version of Klaus teleport in and force teleport the other Haley away and tell our Haley and Steve to go back home. Exposition Lewis shows up and teleports them home, but not without this amazing line first.
There's no time to explain, which sucks because there's actually a really cool, well thought out explanation behind all of this. You have to return to your universe.
Our Steve and Haley teleport back to our universe, but now it looks weird because the multiverse is imploding. And right as they arrive, for literally like 2 seconds, we get what is my favorite Easter egg in the entire episode, which is that we can just barely see Reggie the koala as he turns into a human again. I'm not sure if he's gonna stay that way, but I think it's awesome, especially because we haven't really seen Reggie in forever. Anyways, the writers obviously just decide to do away with the multiverse watch things because simultaneously, Haley's breaks and Steve loses his, which some guy finds and teleports away only to get eaten by a dinosaur. And after a quick reminder from Lewis,
You and Steve have a destiny to fulfill. Shaggy is the only constant throughout the multiverse. You gotta save Shaggy or we're all gonna die!
the two set out to save Shaggy from the collapsed shark's nest using Steve's schematics and info from the firefighters, who tell them that two men who wind up being our Lewises barricaded themselves in the dressing room with Shaggy. As it turns out, the man who Lewis's wife had cheated with was in fact Shaggy. We get another cool multiverse effect here when the Lewises start punching Shaggy, and the animation shifts on each hit. First to an old school black and white animation, then to a South Park style animation, and then to what looks like a 3D modeled version of an anime style. Steve and Haley barge in to stop them and explain that by killing Shaggy, they'll destroy the multiverse. And Vengeance Lewis gets one last kick in, turning the animation back to normal. Haley gives a little speech about love and spending time together, together, and the Lewises agree to give up revenge on Shaggy and just hang out together. Everybody hugs and Shaggy says,
"I'm never playing this down again."
And then it takes 2 back-to-back turns.
At last, the multiverse is at ease.
Out here, we can see the multiversal tree that all American Dad timelines take place in, surrounded by a bunch of those Jeff Trinities on their steampunk Klauses. I've stared at this for a while, and there's really nothing here, unfortunately. All the Jeffs are identical, all in sets of 3 with a Klaus. No hidden details anywhere, nothing. But then this happens.
It was me.
And that is just classic American Dad, just like the CeeLo Green episode.
Well, there you have it. That's our story. Stan's dead. Good night.
But the truly last Easter egg in the episode is the Underdog Productions clip, which usually has him saying this.
Bye, have a beautiful time.
But in this episode, he says,
Bye-bye, see you soon.
Now, I'm not sure if this has happened before, to be honest. It may have. Let me know if you've seen it. But I checked a dozen random episodes and they all had the first one. So who knows what this could mean. Seems suspicious, though. Overall, it was a really fun episode. They packed a lot of details in. The story was pretty typical for a multiverse story, but I loved seeing them do it. And like I said, they did pack plenty of details and Easter eggs in there for us. I'm sure we'll see more of the multiverse eventually, no matter what, but this season's finale is titled Into the Jingleverse, which seems to me like a setup for the multiverse Christmas episodes. And I honestly would not mind at all if they leaned more into this. I would love to see more multiverse stuff. I mean, they've been setting it up for nearly 2 decades now, and they do it so well. So, keep it up, American Dad team. But anyways, that's all I've got for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If I missed anything, or if you have any ideas for future videos, leave a comment below, and I'll see you in the next one.
Klaus wrote the lyrics.